Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways.
Hey, it's Ryan Reynolds, and I'm here with Keith, co-star of my upcoming film, If, only in theaters May 17th. Do you want to tell people the big news? All right, I'll do it. Sign up now and you'll get unlimited for $15 a month and 6 months of Paramount Plus Essential Plan on us. MintMobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 equivalent to $15 per month. Unlimited over 40 gigabytes per month. Face lower speeds. Videos at 480p. Active Mint customers by 531.24 get 6 months of Paramount Plus Essential Plan. Auto renews after 6 months. Offer ends May 31st, 2024. Separate Paramount Plus registration required. Terms and conditions apply if rated PG.
This episode is brought to you by Twizzlers. Long day, late night, feeling a little bored? Twizzlers is the ultimate sidekick for any moment of the day, no matter what kind of day you're having. The perfect level of sweet and a fun excuse to sit back and relax. Unwind with Twizzlers. To buy now, visit Hersheyland.com/Twizzlers.
Of the Allied Expeditionary Force. You are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you.
On the eve of this great adventure, I send my best wishes to every soldier in the Allied team.
The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.
Now that the fighting has moved inland, human litter extends in a thin little line, just like a high water mark, for miles along the beach. This is the strewn personal gear that will never be needed again, of those who fought and died to give us our entrance into Europe. Here in a jumbled row for mile on mile are soldiers' packs. Here are socks and shoe polish, sewing kits, diaries, Bibles, and hand grenades. Here are the latest letters from home, with the addresses on each one, neatly razored out, one of the security precautions enforced before the boys embarked. Here are the toothbrushes and razors and snapshots of families back home, staring up at you from the sand. Here are pocketbooks, metal mirrors, extra trousers, and bloody abandoned shoes. Here are broken-handled shovels and portable radios smashed almost beyond recognition, and mine detectors twisted and ruined. The strong, swirling tides of the Normandy coastline shift the contours of the sandy beach as they move in and out. They carry soldiers' bodies out to sea, and later they return them. They cover the bodies of heroes with sand, and then in their whims they uncover them. As I plowed out over the wet sand of the beach on that first day ashore, I walked around what seemed to be a couple of pieces of driftwood sticking out of the sand. They were a soldier's 2 feet. He was completely covered by the shifting sands except for his feet. The toes of his GI shoes pointed toward the land. Ernie Parr could write, couldn't he?
Oh, man, he is the master.
Yeah, he's very good.
He is the master.
Yes, painting a scene. Welcome to Second World War Pod, WW2 Pod. We have ways of making you talk with me, Murray and James Holland. And this is part 4. I've already lost track. Part 4 of our D-Day Overlord series, and already we promised you 12 episodes, and we had a conflab. James, basically, we did some of this yesterday, and then James stayed over because we're recording these rather than in our usual style, recording these in Zoom. We're at Spotify HQ recording this across a desk in an extremely swanky high-tech environment. And last night, James stayed over. We drank 2 bottles of wine, watched episode 5 of Masters of the Air.
Yeah. Mrs. Murray returned to her. Oh, God, you two.
Yeah, what are you watching?
Yeah. When watching episode 4.
Exactly.
Looking slightly sheepish.
She did actually sit down and watch the rest of it with us, but there we go. And then started on the Memphis Belle footage. But anyway, what we decided is that we can't contain what we were planning to fit into one episode. It's got to go into two, so we're going to do part one of what was one part, but is now a whole part to itself.
It's and you know why? It's because this is D-Day.
This is D-Day.
This is D-Day. It's the daddy, and you can't hurry this stuff.
And we have previously on the podcast, as a regular listener will tell you, that say that, it's the 3Ds, Dunkirk, D-Day, Dam Busters, for some people, the Second World War, but we are inevitably magnetically drawn to this day.
Because it is such an immense event. It remains, certainly in the Western Hemisphere, it remains the pivotal moment.
Well,
in Western history.
If Alamein is the end of the beginning, this is the beginning of the end.
Yes.
If we're being Churchillian about this, this is the point where, although obviously Italy is mainland Europe, and anyone who says this is the invasion of mainland Europe needs to go back to an atlas, and have it pointed out where Italy is and shouted at them that is mainland Europe. This is the straightest line to Germany, which is the thing that the Americans have wanted all along, and that's what this day represents. It's the beginning of the end, basically.
It absolutely does, and it's worth not hurrying it too much. But I think also the scale of it is just enormous. And I think before we get on to what happens on Utah Beach and on Omaha, we talked a little bit about the early hours of D-Day in the last episode and what happens with the airborne drops and all the rest of it, and the German chaos, and more of that anon. But I think before that, it's worth to just sort of take a half step back and look at the scale of it. And again, I always find myself kind of comparing Operation Sea Lion, the kind of proposed German invasion of Britain in the summer of 1940 that never happened. And you realise what a huge contrast the two operations are, and the enormity of Operation Overlord and the enormity of Operation Neptune, which is the naval bit. And the statistics for D-Day are absolutely jaw-dropping. So amassed for the Armada is is literally single digits less than 7,000 aircraft. It's 6,900 and something. And 7,000 vessels. Just think what that looks like.
Yeah.
Even if some of them are quite small, that's still enormous. That's 1,213 warships, as we talked about the other day, of which 892 are the Royal Navy, 200 of the United States, but also from Canada, from Norway, France, the Netherlands and Poland as well, all contributing.
Yeah.
138 bombarding warships. Yeah. 138 warships. Yeah. I mean, that's just huge. 279 escort ships, 287 mine layers.
Yeah.
495 gunboats, torpedo boats and other launches.
Rocket ships and stuff.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. 4,127 assault craft. You think about kind of 359 for Operation Avalanche.
Yeah. And 3,216 of those are British. And the thing to remember, of course, is on D-Day itself, they're not just dropping one load of guys off. They drop one load of guys off, they tootle round, they go and they're on a permanent beetle. So
and they're on the permanent beetle for the entire campaign.
Yeah.
It's it is non-stop.
Relentless.
Back and forth, back and forth. It is the most overused shipping channel in the world in June, July and August 1944.
Yeah.
1,260 merchant vessels as well.
Right.
So what they're doing and that's because there aren't enough landing ships, that most important vessel of them all, which only has a kind of 4'8" draft when full 120 meters long. These are the absolute most important vessels of them all, and there aren't enough, so they're having to do it with using merchant vessels, which would. Ultimately they come into the Mulberry Harbours and what have you, but for the most part they're getting as close to shore as they can, dropping anchor, and then tossing down into being ferried on and off into ducks. Yeah. This other genius invention by the Americans, this amphibious landcraft truck, just absolutely amazing. One of the biggest problems of the whole thing is how to get through the minefields, because between 7 and 10 miles off the coast are thick minefields the whole way through.
Just briefly, it is worth comparing it to Sea Lion, but one of the big differences between Sea Lion Overlord is that 4 years war have progressed, and the English Channel has been mined, mined by both sides, basically constantly. So that there are differences of contingency because of the war has progressed the way it has. But this is still on a sort of a different plane completely, isn't it? The coordination, but also the fact that vessels have been built for this purpose in a way that the Sea Lion was going to be, barges off the Rhine, improvised. I mean, they were going to actually use we're talking about merchant vessels here, they were going to use the stuff that keeps Germany going, the trade of Germany going up and down the Rhine, they were going to use those to invade England. I mean, it's just how harebrained and disorganised it is. And again, we come back to the point we made in the last episode that the Germans aren't improvising so much as scrabbling around looking for solutions.
Completely.
When they try and do things outside their operational purview, as it were. Whereas the Allies have an operational purview, equipment for it, and that's why they're able to then improvise, rather than they're not scrabbling around looking for solutions. Yep. They're improvising from a solid and conceptual base and, stuff built to that concept.
Well, I just think every part of this operation, both Neptune and Overlord, every single part requires just unbelievable scales of logistics, complications, but unbelievable levels of thought.
Yeah.
There is literally not a stone that's been left unturned.
Yeah.
The big problem is you've got this huge invasion force of, best part of 7,000 vessels. How are you going to get that through? How are you going to get 5 different task force?
Because it's 5 invasions.
It's 5 invasions over 5 beaches. How are you going to get those through a minefield, which is 3 miles thick, between 7 and 10 miles off the coast? Yeah. That is a major headache. And, Ramsay says it's a most complicated operation, and however we look at it, we could find no satisfactory solution of how best to sweep the channels for the faster groups and bombarding ships. And this is a problem, because you have to do this last minute, because otherwise the Germans will put more in. Yeah. And how these mines work is, those sort of helium balloons that you have at parties that are on a weight and they kind of float up from the floor or top of the table or whatever. It's the same principle. So you have a weight dropped in the bottom, and it comes up, and your big round thing
is hanging
that looks like a sort of bacteria with the points on it. It looks like a sort of COVID thing.
Like a virus.
It's like a virus.
The COVID virus.
Yeah. It looks like a COVID virus. It's weighted so it's underneath the surface. Yeah. And the ship goes, it hits it, bomb, and off you go. Yeah. So how do you cut these? And how do you prevent them from... They don't move around too much, but obviously they sway. Yeah. In the tides and what have you. But you have to have these very clear channels. And this has to be done at night as the invasion force is coming. It can only be just ahead of it. You can't sweep the day before, because otherwise the cat's out of the bag. Yeah. You've got to do it that night. And they cannot be at home to Mr. and Mrs. Cockup. Yeah. So no pressure at all. And how they do it is that they sweep with 2 channels off each beach. So and they're marked with dam buoys, and dam buoys are buoys which you put into the sea as you're doing it, with a massive great flag on the top of a kind of antennae. Yeah. And so they can see at night that is where you need to go. But my God, the room for...
Well, Mark Ferrer, and there are countless mines basically in the sea, aren't there?
Yes. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. Yeah. So how you do this is they do it by amassing 255 minesweepers for this operation, which are basically 50 each. Yeah. Or 25 per channel. Yeah. That's how it works out. And you're doing an oropesa sweep. This is the technique. What you have is, as you're going along, you have wires either side of the ship, which are weighted down like a sort of fishing line, with weights, and they have little blades on them. And as this wire sweeps out, what happens is it gathers, like a sort of harvester. Yeah. It gathers the wire of the mine in it and pulls it until it reaches the blades, which are the otters. Right. And cuts them. And then they rise to the surface. The blades are called kites and otters. Yeah. And they rise to the surface, and then you just shoot them, blow them up.
Blow them up. Right.
And that's how you do it. Wow. So what you do is you have these 5 ships really close together going forward with these wires.
Snagging and cutting and then flushing them to the surface and destroying them. Yeah. I mean, again, with D-Day, we so often talk about, the sort of organisation of how did they land at Pegasus Bridge? How did they do that? And the focus on that. But all this backstage stuff has to happen before any of it can happen. And it's being organised in extraordinary triplicate too. This is the other thing. I mean, these are typed orders that have been issued all over the Navy, and it is
the
organisational side
how
of it is amazing.
It is absolutely amazing. It is one of the most brilliantly executed operations of the entire Second World War.
Yeah.
And it gets no credit whatsoever because it just happens.
Yeah.
It's at night. No one sees it. It's just something that happens. They just get to the, of course they do.
Yeah.
There's no of course about it at all.
Yeah.
This is a very, very intricate operation, very complicated, and they absolutely pull it off opposite every single beach. And you do that only by training at the highest level.
Yeah.
I mean, these are really, minesweepers are really skilled operators.
Yeah.
In addition to all that, you've got your gunboats, you've got your warships, you've got all the rest of it. You've got the LSTs, of course. And the LSTs, they can carry 18 30-ton tanks, which is another reason why you don't want Pershings.
Yeah.
This is all about loading.
Yeah, because you'd be looking at 12 tanks.
Or 8.
Or 8 or whatever. Immediately it bites into, actually, because with 3 of those ships, you can pretty much deliver a regiment, can't you?
Yeah, and as they're discovering in Ukraine, there's a value in quantity all of its own.
Yeah.
Or 350 troops, or 2,100 tons of supplies, and an LSI can take 1,500 troops. So that's 1.5 battalions.
Yeah. So that 2 SLIs is basically a brigade.
Yeah.
So, or 2 trips from an LSI is a brigade of soldiers, and it's 3 brigades or regiments to a division. So this is the
maths,
the lift power that these ships offer,
and they literally can go onto the beach. And of course, in the Channel, you've got very high tides, which is fantastic news for delivering material from landing craft.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you want.
Yeah.
But they've also got this staggering array of landing craft. So you've got the LCA, the Landing Craft Assault, which is a British version. Or you've got the LCVP, which of course is the Higgins boat.
Yeah.
Then you've got an LCT, open bracket, R, close bracket. Which is
a rocket.
Yeah.
For those of you who like your rockets.
It's a landing craft tank rocket.
Yeah.
And this is equipped with a Type 970 radar.
Yeah.
So it's radar directed, firing salvos up to 1,060-pound warheads. And these things are absolutely amazing. They're a big, long LCT, about 50 metres long. You've got the engine bay at the back, the pilot house at the back.
Yeah.
And the whole deck is just filled with rockets, angled at 45 degrees. And these things, to see them in action is just unbelievable.
3-inch rockets. So, are they?
They're the same things that you put under a Typhoon.
And those rockets are left over from anti-aircraft rocket scheme in sort of 1940, aren't they? They're developed for an anti-aircraft rocket.
Yeah.
Project that Churchill's really into, and then it doesn't quite work.
Yeah, so they've got all these rockets left over.
So it's basically fireworks night. It's rockets in a great big milk bottle in a landing craft.
And to see them fire off, they just go whoosh. They go off in segments.
Yeah.
And they're for saturation. These are for saturating the coast and sort of blowing up wire and mines and all the rest of it. Incredibly effective.
Well, and I mean, if you're on the receiving end of that, I mean, it's terrifying. You're fully freaked out, aren't you?
Yeah.
And that can operate from 3,500 yards, so sort of 2.5 miles.
Something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
So there's not as many LSTs as they want. They want 277. I mean, do you remember, again, when we were looking at Anzio and we were sort of thinking, well, we can get 90. It's a sort of different thing, but they want 277, they get 236. It is absolutely huge. Then there's all the other planning about sort of how do you supply the front.
Well,
one of the big things is fuel, because we're a mechanised force.
Before that, these are 120 metre long ships that draw 4 foot 7 inches. They draw next to nothing.
Yeah.
So what you're looking
at
when laden. So one of the weather considerations is that a ship like that, it's quite difficult to get through a rough sea because it doesn't draw very much.
No.
It'll bob about. It'll get blown around.
Also because the sides are basically flat. It's like a sail.
Exactly. So it gets it could be blown around by wind and tide. So there is obviously a constraint on what you can do with a ship like that, because it doesn't have a keel which stabilises against wind or tide. So that's why, in our last episode, when they're talking about weather, it's not just the air component. It's partly the sea component, isn't it? Because
it's massively the sea component.
A ship like that will get blown about, basically. Yes. And I imagine it has a very powerful engine at the back, tubes at the back that mean that the screws are contained, because otherwise you're looking at snagging them when you're
exactly that.
And an engine that you can put in reverse extremely powerfully to draw it back off the beach.
Yes.
I mean, this is extraordinary engineering, isn't it?
It's absolutely incredible. And, no one has thought about this in 1940.
No.
And here we are 4 years later with 4,127 landing craft. Just for this, and in addition to what's going on in the Pacific at the same time.
Yeah.
So it is absolutely astonishing. How you get fuel there is a problem because fuel is very bulky and it takes up a huge amount of space. So what they do, they come up with this plan called Pluto.
Well, and it's consumable. So, it's gone.
Yes.
So if you're sending ships backwards and forwards, tankers backwards and forwards, sending them back empty, that's a fuel expending trip. So
yes,
you need to find a way around that too.
Yep. So what they come up with is a thing called the Pluto, which is the pipeline under the ocean, which is a 76 millimeter pipe. The technology for this was the hardest. So the concept was fine.
Yeah.
Creating the technology that enables them to fulfill the concept was really difficult. This requires amazing science and engineering and physics and all the rest of it, because obviously you've got the pressure of the sea.
Yeah,
because you're lying it. Basically, what you're doing is you're having a massive pipeline, which you are going to run from refineries in Southampton across to the Isle of Wight, out of the Isle of Wight, and then down into across the English Channel all the way to the Normandy coast.
Yeah,
and this weighs 55 tons per mile. Yeah. And it is made from a combination of lead lining, steel mesh, and reinforced rubber. And it's spooled from a thing called a conundrum.
Had anything like this been done before?
Not on this scale. I mean, obviously they've done cables across the Atlantic.
Well, I know, because I was thinking cables was the thing I was thinking of.
Cable and wireless.
Exactly, the nearest equivalent.
Yeah.
Transatlantic telegram cables.
Yes.
And all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But this is of a different order, isn't it?
It's a different order.
Because the pipe has to stay open, doesn't it?
It has to stay completely open, and it has to be able to kind of take the pressure of the water above and be guaranteed that it doesn't get damaged. I mean, you imagine if you have a leak. It's just that can't be allowed to happen.
People have poo-pooed the Pluto, haven't they?
But that's absurd. I mean, it was incredibly important.
Well, an important part of how you plan a big operation like this, you'd have tons of redundancy built into it. You have lots of waste built into it. Because when people go, why can't we run efficiently like we did in the war? They're not necessarily being efficiently run. They're being run with giant redundancy and colossal amounts of waste so that you have the wiggle room for when things go wrong. So they may well make 7 million 5-gallon jerry cans in the UK. Sounds like plenty. But you're also laying a pipe under the ocean. The Americans are also churning out jerry cans by the million.
Yeah.
Because you need redundancy built into it, because that's actually how you fight.
Yep.
And waste is a big part of this. And I think people sometimes forget that. They think military efficiency is a sort of thing people like to say, things need to be planned with military efficiency.
But efficiency is planned but not being caught short.
Exactly. So
it's having
tons of waste built into the thing.
Yeah.
I mean, because if you think you need 8,000 tons of fuel per day, you're not going to supply
8,000 tons of fuel per day. You think that the German troops on the front were getting 1,200 in Italy a day.
Yeah.
Total.
Yeah.
But this force needs 8,000 tons of fuel per day.
Yeah.
And 1,720,900 tons of fuel reached the UK from the US and Venezuela just between January and May 1944.
That's tons of fuel, right? We're not talking litres here.
Tons.
It's tons. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that it's weighed in tons rather than volume? Because after all, it's been shipped. It's tons of shipping, isn't it? It is what this amounts to. I mean, that's an awful lot of petrol or fuel. It's interesting it's coming from Venezuela as well.
Yeah. Well, second biggest producer of oil at the time. Yeah. And America's obviously the most. So you got two invasion forces. The Western Task Force and the Eastern Task Force. So the Western Task Force is commanded by Rear Admiral Alan Kirk, who's American. Eastern by Rear Admiral Philip Vian, who's just been literally everywhere in the war. I mean, what a massive war he's had. They form up at a place called Piccadilly Circus, always is, or Area Z, which is just off the Isle of Wight. So they all come out from their different ports all along the south coast of England, from all the way from from Deal all the way to Penzance. Come and meet at this point south of the Isle of Wight.
Using all the ports because that's the capacity you need. Yeah. You need absolutely every single port.
Yes, and they're creating ports.
Yeah.
So there's little creeks in South Cornwall which have got the chocolate concrete. Which were just little creeks with a riverboat, rowing boat, and now they're not. Putting all this together is more than 1,000 staff at Fort Southwark, which is one of those forts, those old Napoleonic Georgian era forts on the top of that hill, Portdown Hill, just south of, or just north rather, of Portsmouth.
But overlooks Portsmouth.
It's that big hill.
When you drive out to Portsmouth,
that big sort of chalk cliffs.
When you drive out of Portsmouth, you see it up there, and there's a sort of modern naval gubbins up there in white and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
So they're doing that in Fort Suffolk, and underneath Fort Suffolk, built into the cliffs, and I've actually been into this place, there's 700 staff operating these huge tunnels. So there's 5 110-yard tunnels and 14 cross tunnels of 55 yards each which sort of then go into kind of huge, great underground rooms.
Yep.
And this is where all the detail, this is the UGHQ, underground headquarters, remains top secret. No one's allowed to know about it unless you're there.
Yep.
It's access from steps down. There's like 120 steps that you go down into it from Fort Suffolk, and there it all is.
Yeah.
It's now being used as a sort of BB gun place, which is rather sad. But absolutely just incredible.
Yeah.
And that is where the minutiae of planning, allocations and all the rest of it, and fuels and supplies and all the rest, because you're not just taking men over, you're taking material. And all that's got to be worked out.
And it's done on a chalks system. So what you're not allocated a ship, you're given a chalk number, aren't you?
Yes, in case you need to change ship.
In case you need to change ship. So if the ship breaks down, you're just getting a different ship with your chalk.
Yeah. And then the other bit of big thinking, which I love, is the mulberries. And I'm sure we'll do a whole episode on this at some point. But the mulberries they're extraordinary. I always just think the most amazing thing about the mulberries, so these are 2 portable harbours, each the size of Dover, which are transported across the channel and put in place, one at Port-en-Bassin, which is sort of between Arromanches and Omaha Beach, which is for the Americans, and then one at Arromanches for the British. So A is for Americans, B is for British. And just the sheer nerve, the chutzpah to have the concept alone. And everyone's sort of debating this, how well on earth we're going to do this. And this is where Churchill does his famous line, don't argue the matter, the complications will argue for themselves.
Yeah.
You just get on with it. I use this all the time when I'm doing Chalk History Festival. Gets everyone really annoyed. But, this is 300 different firms are involved in manufacturing these, including Wimpy, McAlpine, some of the biggest manufacturing
55,000
engineers.
people working on it, which I think is an interesting contrast with the Germans have, 70,000 French people pouring concrete.
Yeah.
On the Normandy coast. Yes. So kind of a comparable amount of people working on it.
And lots of concrete too.
Yeah.
So the biggest component are the phoenixes, these long caissons, 200 feet long, great big rectangular blocks that look like sort of giant Lego blocks, which you sink into the ground. Into the thing, and they're the sea wall effectively, but they're hollow inside, so you can float them. You take the air, they have valves, put air in, take the air out. Yeah. So the air is what floats them, and these blocks alone take up 542,000 cubic yards of concrete and 39,000 tons of steel. They're absolutely extraordinary, and they're built in yards all around the little shipyards all around the country, all the way in Scotland and all over the place.
And so they've already set off, haven't they?
They've been coming down south through April and May.
When does the first Mulberry vessel arrive off the Normandy coast?
Oh, it's literally
D+1, isn't it?
I think the Mulberry is up and running by the 14th of June or something like that. I mean, it's absolutely astonishing. So what they do is they obviously want to hide them from the Germans. They don't want anyone to see this. So what they do is they get them to the south coast and then sink them. And then when they're ready to take them across, they refloat them. And I mean, just incredible.
I mean, there is a secrecy mania around Overlord, isn't there?
Yeah.
One of the airborne planners calls it that. He calls it a secrecy mania. And at one point...
But I think that's a very healthy thing to do.
Well, I know, but he says, but at one point some orders are blown off the back of a lorry, right?
And everyone freaks out.
Well, everyone freaks out, and then they agree amongst themselves. They're just never going to tell anyone. Yeah, the best thing to do is simply not tell anyone.
Let's have another pact of secrecy.
Yeah, and no one will ever know that they lost these landing zone plans for 6 Airborne's lift, lost out the back of a lorry. And he goes, you know what the best thing to do? Let's never mention it again. Anyway, so with the Mulberry, there's corn cobs, which are old ships that they sink as well.
Yeah, so they do this across every single beach. This is create an instant breakwater, which enables you to then plant the Mulberry Harbour. Yeah. But in addition to the 2 Mulberries, they also have these corncod ships into these rough breakwaters called gooseberries off every single invasion beach. Yeah. So they have them there as well. Yeah. It's so brilliantly thought through.
Well, and again, the thing we've done is contrast with this with the Germans, squabbling over this, that and the other, and also contrast this with the Germans in Hungary, what they're actually interested in. Ideas beyond the Germans' imagination have been conceived and enacted and put into place and built and money spent on it. It's extraordinary. Because the American industry has gone into complete overdrive. I think in 1939 they make 18 tanks.
Yes.
And in
by May 1944, they've created 60,000, as well as 1.7 million trucks, 150,000 artillery pieces. But, the Brits haven't been idle. I mean, they've created 49,000 tanks and AFVs by armoured fighting vehicles.
It's only 10,000 short.
Yeah. But they've been at it a bit longer. But but point taken. 28,000 aircraft by the British in 1943 alone. I mean, so the Americans produced 83,000. But even so, that's, it's a much bigger place and bigger people.
Bigger country, bigger
and they're not being bombed and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
19,000 guns. So they've got this huge amount of material. One of the big problems is, as we touched on yesterday, is sort of, when will H hour be? So you have D-Day is D for day. That is the day. H for hour.
And that's like the shipping chalk. So you can change the day.
Yes.
You can change the day.
Yes, exactly.
And you can change the time.
Yep.
It's exactly that principle. So if you decide you're not going on the 5th of June and you're going on the 6th of June, which is exactly what happens, D-Day simply moves.
Yes.
That you change the day. Yeah.
Exactly. So this causes much debate. It was originally going to be 40 minutes before dawn, but then they realised the number of beach obstacles is too great. You're not going to be able to see them. You need the tide to be lower so that you can get through them. But also the tide varies, of course, along the coastline. It's quite a long coastline. So it's finally agreed on the 23rd of May that the US troops are going to land at 6:30 a.m. On Sword Beach, it's going to be 7:25 a.m. At Gold Beach, it's going to be 7:30 a.m. And at Juneau, it's going to be a little bit later because of complications of offshore shoals. So the tide then needs to be a little bit higher again. So that's going to be 7:45 a.m. And now we're all set for the landings. I mean, the thing is, when you got the numbers in front of you, it all starts to look, it looks so incredibly serious. And when we were looking just amazing.
And again, when we were looking at the German numbers where, the Germans have reduced the division size, everything's getting smaller, everything's contracting.
This is just getting bigger
and crazier. And the ambition of the Mulberries.
It's incredible.
And its execution is extraordinary. Anyway.
But what it shows is that if they can secure the lodgement, they will win because their material might is so great that the Germans can't possibly compete, which is why D-Day is so front-loaded. The Operation Overlord is so front-loaded to D-Day itself and the days that immediately follow, why they're so important.
We'll see you after the break.
This episode is brought to you by Twizzlers. Long day, late night, feeling a little bored? Twizzlers is the ultimate sidekick for any moment of the day, no matter what kind of day you're having. The perfect level of sweet and a fun excuse to sit back and relax. Unwind with Twizzlers. To buy now, visit Hersheyland.com/Twizzlers.
Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. It's part 4, isn't it, Jim, of our Overlord special?
Part 4.
Now, the eagle-eared amongst you may have noticed that I sound slightly different, so does James. That's because this second half of this episode has been recorded many days after the first part, because in the interim, I've been to Dubai and back in this torrid, annoying journey involving unprecedented flooding in the Emirate. We did the first half of this in the Spotify studio in London, just off the Strand, and now I'm in Sheffield City Hall, and Jim's in Holland HQ, his TAC HQ in Chalk.
Yeah.
Anyway, so part 2, we now come to the American Airborne drops, and I mean they put 13,100 paratroops down in the dead of night.
Yep.
Because often these lifts are characterised as people going astray, but they're going to, aren't they?
Well, yeah, but the other thing is the way it's always been presented is as a kind of totally scattered to the four winds, absolutely hopeless, all over the place.
Yeah.
But actually, you look at the statistics, there's some amazing maps that they did showing all the kind of the drops and everything.
Little
and
sticks,
actually,
literally.
And actually you think, not too bad, really.
Yeah.
And then you kind of start analysing it and you realise that only 21 out of 821 were shot down or lost. 50% landed between 1 or 2 miles of their DZs. Yeah, take that, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Well,
middle of the night.
Given the circumstances, the middle of the night. And 389 tons of supplies, 14 6-pounders. So their stuff's been sent. And it's 10% are more than 10 miles away.
But 75% land within 5 miles. Now, these guys are young men. They're really fit. You can walk 3.5 miles an hour without any problem whatsoever. Yeah. So why is it that when, Dick Winters turns up at kind of near Breacourt Manor on the dawn and there's hardly anyone in the 506th and they're all over the place? Why is that? And of course, the problem is you're landing in the dark. You're still landing scattered, even if you're scattered reasonably close to one another. At night, a square field surrounded by hedges and trees can be quite an intimidating place. And of course, if you don't know where you are, you haven't got a reference point. So quite often you might only be 1 to 2 miles of where you're supposed to be, but you might not end up walking 8 to work that out.
Well, so it's march towards the guns, isn't it? Sound to the gunfire is basically what happens.
Well, I suppose so, and stop on people's doors and knock the doors and go, where am I? Can you show me on the map, please?
Yeah.
Because a map's only useful if you know where you are in relation to that map.
Yeah, but the best is 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment, who all land on a DZ north of Carentan. The worst drop is the 507th from the 82nd, who mainly landed. There's a flooded area around Minelaying because the Germans, they know that this is as likely a place as any for an airborne landing, so they flood it because they can. And
not only that, they put up the 91st Luftlanding Division. Base of the Kotentan is about as obvious a place as you're ever going to have an airborne drop. And they're not that stupid that they haven't worked that one out. So they're all there, but in a weird sort of way, the scattergun, albeit comparatively scattergun, nature of the airborne drop actually works in their favour because, of course, the Germans haven't got a clue what's going on either.
Yeah.
And around every corner, there seems to be another American paratrooper.
Yeah.
Armed to the teeth.
I'd still say, though, if you're Max or Taylor or Ridgway, what you actually want is everyone to land nice and tidily together, and then you can proceed from there, and you'll trade that for the confusion, right? I mean, I often think that's making a virtue of a necessity of an airborne landing. So, we confuse the enemy. Yeah, but that's only part of it. Part of your job is confusing the enemy.
Well, that is true.
Decisively beating him.
Well, yeah. I agree with that. But my point is, it's not all disaster. There are benefits, and one of the benefits is that they managed to run into General Falley, who is the commander of the 91st Luftlanding Division, who has been on his way to Rennes.
Yeah.
And basically, they've been told that they've got this sort of anti-invasion exercise the following day on the 6th of June, and they've been told whatever happens, don't travel down to Rennes on the night of the 5th. Go down in the morning. But Falley thinks, sod that for a game of biscuits. I'm gonna go down anyway. So he heads down when he gets and he's halfway there when he gets told, paratroopers are falling as he's checking in. You come back immediately. So he comes back immediately and is just driving. So his headquarters is a chateau. And behind the chateau are some fields, and there's a little sort of back road, this tiny little back road, which leads to where his command post was, which is obviously a sort of series of tents in the corner of a field. And he's just nearing it. He's literally there, comes around the corner, and he bumps into kind of Lieutenant Malcolm Brannan and a few others from the 3rd Battalion of the 508th PIR, which is part of the 82nd Airborne. And they stop the car. But instead of stopping, the car pushes on. They open fire with their Tommy guns. Car hits the wall of a big building, big farmhouse. So it's not a farmhouse. It's like a sort of, it was like a mill house, I think is what it was. Anyway, you still got scratch marks on the building. It's quite interesting where the car hits. I think the driver is wounded. He manages to get out of the car. Another officer is completely killed, and a third officer is knocked clear of the car and is crawling across the road towards his P-38 or his Luger or whatever, which is out of his hand and got knocked across the road. And he goes, don't kill, to Brannan, who is looking at him, but still stupidly makes for his pistol.
Yeah.
So Brannan shoots him.
And Brannan is a fired-up paratrooper opening the second front, who's been on the receiving end of a great deal of hype about being tough with the enemy. So, I mean, what else is he going to do? I mean, this is very interesting, isn't it? Generals blundering around in the middle of parachute landings, things could go wrong for you.
That is the clear lesson from the varsity of life.
But there's a lot. There's a lot. I mean,
but Brannan doesn't know who he's killed. He doesn't know he's killed until he picks up his hat, and looks on the inside of the hat, and it says, W. Falley.
Absolutely amazing.
And it is him.
But there's all sorts of extraordinary actions that night. There's it's a sergeant from the 82nd Airborne who basically bursts into a farmhouse, finds it's full of German, kills them all, and then, comes out.
I'm laughing. It's not funny. I mean,
it's not funny. Kills literally all of them. Two magazines of his Tommy gun, comes out the other end, and they were like, what happened in there, Sarge? It's like, well, you don't want to know. There's that sort of stuff going on. And the Germans are caught out by all of this, aren't they? Even though these are invasion troops. I mean, the 91st Luftlanding Division, this is their speciality, is dealing with airborne landings, supposedly. Yep. There's a second front coming, everyone knows it, yet they're still really caught with their trousers down by all of this.
Big time.
Aren't they? I mean, it's quite extraordinary, actually.
Yeah.
the 82nd, their role is so 101st are causeways, aren't they? And 82nd is nodal points, essentially.
Yes, so 101st are there to secure the high ground above Utah Beach.
Yeah.
And also try and get to Carentan. That's the thing. So there's these 4 exits from Utah Beach, and the 4th Infantry Division is supposed to be exiting from the 2 most northern ones.
Yeah.
So the 101st is supposed to be covering that. And of the 3 regiments, parachute infantry regiments of the 101st, 2 are earmarked for protecting the draws from Utah, and 1 is sent to go off and secure Carentan, which is a town just inland of this hinge between the base of this sort of 90-degree hinge between the base of the Cotentin Peninsula and the northern coast of the main part of the Normandy coastline. And actually, I think they've got that slightly wrong. I think they should have had 2 regiments going towards Carentan, because Carentan is a much more challenging objective, and only 1 covering the draws. And what you could have then taken is 1 of the regiments from the 82nd Airborne and had them covering the northern part of the draws, and 1 of the regiments from the 101st covering the 2 southern draws. Yeah. That would have been a much better kind of use of your manpower. You don't bother with the western side of the Murray, which is why the kind of, the 507th struggle so badly.
Yeah.
Because they all come down in the flooded bit of the valley. And what you really want is the high ground, which rises up from Utah Beach on the eastern side of the Cotentin Peninsula, stays on a kind of sort of level where the main road north to Cherbourg and the railway line run sort of parallel to one another. And the road goes through Saint-Mary-Église, which, anyone who's known anything about D-Day would have heard about because of
Saint-Mary-Église.
Yeah, exactly. Saint-Mary-Église. Yeah, and the paratrooper on the steeple and all the rest of it.
Or was he?
Well, yeah.
Probably not.
Probably not. Moot point. But because you've got the flooded area, you don't actually need to be on the western side.
Yes, because it's flooded.
Because it's flooded. You blow up the bridge and job done.
But isn't it interesting though? I mean, they know all about the flooding. They know that this is an obstacle the Germans have put in. And the same happens at the other end, where the Canadian Air Parachute Battalion do very badly landing in the water. Have a very torrid time of it. But it's priced in. It's a risk. Fine. Some of you are going to end up in the drink. And I find that the attitude to risk around D-Day is really, really very interesting. It's like, well, too bad. This is too big to fail.
Well, yeah, I get that. But why do you need the western side of the Murray Valley, which runs north-south and then cuts 90 degrees and comes round towards Carentan? And, so that is already isolating you onto that high ground. It's a high ground you want, and you want to stop any German troops coming across onto the western side, onto the eastern side, rather, where Utah Beach is, so that you can build that up really, really quickly. So there is simply no need to be on the western side of the Murray. It'd be much better to drop to drop 2 regiments around Saint-Mary-Église.
Yeah.
Secure the railway line, secure the town, because Saint-Mary-Église is a crossroads, and it's got the maiden road going to Cherbourg in it, so it's a key nodal point. And then, as I say, you then have your 3rd regiment of the 82nd covering the 2 top draws from Utah Beach, 1 from the 101st covering the southern 2, and then the other 2 regiments of the 101st heading towards Carentan, all of which is a much better way of deploying your 6 parachute infantry regiment.
But that's because you're thinking of them as 6 parachute infantry regiments rather than 2 divisions. And once people are thinking in terms of divisional deployment, they stop thinking in terms of the regimental deployment beneath them. Your problem is that you've got this divisional mindset that now means they deploy in one lot, they deploy in another lot, and never the twain shall meet. Although on the night, of course,
the twain's meeting all the time.
All the time.
But you're absolutely right. That is exactly what's happened, and that is exactly why they're deployed in the way they're deployed.
And it's an ongoing issue for delivery of airborne forces from here on in during the Second World War. It is very interesting, though, isn't it, that they do commit to an airborne landing, because the last time they've tried this en masse, it's been an absolute disaster. Fiasco. Apart from for the Americans, really, who do 82nd Airborne do pretty well in Sicily, but the British Airborne, it's been a complete and utter calamity. Yeah. So it's interesting that they persevere with it.
Yeah, I mean, my view is that the airborne operations are fantastically successful.
Right.
I mean, I really think they work pretty well. There's chaos amongst the Luftlander division. 6th Fallschirmjäger, which is the only other regiment around, they're all over the place, kind of sort of trying to firefight. Yeah. No one knows what the hell's going on. General Falley is killed, so, you're sort of chopping off the kind of command centre, which is never a bad thing. At the start of a battle, they've got the high ground. They managed to secure Saint-Mary-Église pretty quickly that morning.
But the airborne landings also tell you that what you absolutely need is to get tanks ashore, heavy metal ashore, because there's only so much light infantry can do, and of course they are relieved within the day. And they do then hook up, and they then stay in Normandy for a fair while as sort of super infantry, don't they?
Well, 82nd Airborne do particularly, yeah.
But they are the prelude, and airborne doctrine up to this point has been all about securing flanks for coastal landings, and that what you do is you plug either end with your paras and your glider-borne soldiers, and then you come to the beaches.
But they do that, and the British do it because the British 6th Foot Airborne destroys all those bridges over the River Deve. So that prevents the Germans getting onto the high ground to the west. They secure the high ground of the rest around to the west around Breville Ridge. They get that high ground, and they keep open the Horsa and Pegasus Bridge over the River Orne and the Caen Canal. So that's just like tick, 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 and they destroy the Merville Battery.
Yeah.
So they might be spread to the four winds, but they achieve what they've been set out to achieve, what they've been given, the task that they've been given.
And the task is secure the flanks for Utah, Omaha, Gold Sword, and Juno. I mean, these are names I've been familiar with. I went to Normandy when I was 9 in 1977. Yep. We sailed over to Cherbourg, then we went down to Arromanches, and we sat in a restaurant in Arromanches, which was full of Canadians who'd obviously come back, guys in their 50s. Or in the 1970s.
Yeah, no doubt.
Or like, joshing away and laughing and drinking the Norman cider again. And I ate some mussels, but the names Gold Sword, Juno, Omaha, Utah, that's the point at which they were etched in my mind, if no one else's. So, I mean, this is what it's all about, though. This is the thing that absolutely cannot go wrong, isn't it? That this next bit.
Yeah.
You can have paras scattered to the four winds, and, as long as they're fighting in their doughty parties and confusing the enemy, achieving what you need to do, and knocking the other guy off balance, fine. But these landings have to go well, don't they?
Yeah, they absolutely do. But I would say that kind of, by 6 a.m. as the kind of, the American troops at off Utah Beach and Omaha Beach are kind of steaming towards the shore in their LCAs and LCVPs, I would say that the airborne drop has gone pretty well.
Okay.
Now, you can say, well, yeah, but it was scattered and they didn't land where they should and they mixed up their DZs and all this kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, but did they achieve what they set out to achieve?
Yeah.
And the answer is yes.
Which shows that really good planning is one thing, but what you then need is people who can adapt for when the plan goes wrong. Anyone can do well when things go according to plan, but what you need here is people who know how to react when things don't go according to plan.
Yeah. People like Jim Gavin, James Hill, Dick Winters, et al.
Exactly.
Richard
Alistair
Todd.
Pearson, all those people. Yeah, Richard Todd, yeah. Anyway, so hopefully the scene is set for our next episode when we will tackle
D-Day the Beaches.
D-Day, the D-Day Beaches. Thanks very much for listening. We will see you again very soon as we canter through those 5 names that shall live forever in my 9-year-old head. Cheerio.
Cheerio.